So this is week 5-1, and we're going to be talking about a little bit different type of standard, namely some standards and codes that are going to come from the city and state environment. So we talked about drawing standards, and that's just one of the constraints that we need when we do our design. Well, we're also going to gain other constraints in our design, and that's going to come from things like local, state, or federal codes and ordinances. And this is going to determine multiple facets of the design. What needs to be submitted to the state or county offices, street and utility and parking requirements, setbacks of where you can put your buildings and where you can't. These are just some of the constraints that you're going to have in your design. So part of the work that you're going to have to do is going to be kind of detective work. And you're going to have to come in, look at where you're designing your property or whatever, and then go in and check some of the codes and everything else that's involved. Now the plus is a lot of the codes will be pretty similar, so that helps in where you look, and that also helps in what you can expect to find. There are a lot of codes and ordinances that you're going to find in the city ordinances, and they actually have a couple places online where you can go and find these. Municicode.com is one of them, and but there's also normally the city website, and all will have links to those. In it, you'll find things like information on setbacks and right-of-ways and easements and things like that. In addition, you're going to have some of the design standards in like their engineering department page. So you'll find some of that. In Bryan and College Station, there's actually a combined design standards page that they use as far as specifics for like how you design your road or what they expect to see as far as that goes. And that's bcsunited.net. So let's go ahead. We're going to look at those, a couple of those, and just kind of go through how you can kind of pick apart the information and things like that. So let's look at those websites now. So if you look at this is the library that we were talking about, the Municicode library. It actually is all over the U.S. Right now I'm looking at Texas and all this, but you can find a bunch of information in here. Here's like Bryan, Texas, and so if I click on this, you can come in and browse the information based on different stuff. There's a lot of different types of things in here. What you're normally going to find is like here's codes on subdivisions and design standards for subdivisions, and then you can come in and look at this information, and some of it's spelled out, and sometimes you're lucky enough you're going to get information that is going to actually have tables and things like that. Sometimes they don't have that information, but you just got to kind of work through that area and kind of see what's going on. So like here's designs information on streets and sidewalks and what you can find there. And the downside is sometimes if it's not in a table, it's still written out, and you've got to kind of dig your way through it and see what that information is. So here's like streets and what's expected as far as streets and all go, public right-of-ways. These are ways where the public has access, or basically the city has access to go through certain areas that might be on your property or by your property, and the control of right-of-ways and things like that. So there's a lot of different little listings that you can find here. And then over here, this is the Bryan College Station Unified Design Guidelines. And so if you come in here, here is the FEMA floodplain map, so where that is. Here's the design guidelines. If you look, like the newest design guidelines are set for 2012, but then they have the updated up here. So here's revised materials. And if you click on it, it's going to open, it's going to give you a zip folder that's going to have all that information in it. Let me pan down a little bit here. Let's look at a concrete street section right here. So if I click on that, it's going to open up and give you the street section and how it should be designed. This is concrete, and so it calls out everything. And so if you're building a new road, these are the things that you have to follow. Now what you'll notice is it says, okay, how far is it for the right-of-way? That's what ROW stands for. And if you look right here, it's not set, but it says, hey, look under note 1. These are all going to be listed in a document that's going to give you that information, and the document's actually on that page. That's what the updates were based on. Same thing for the width of concrete, the size of sidewalks and things like that. So this kind of gives you the general design, what they expect as far as sub-base goes and concrete. They actually have the curbs in here as well, and so you can see all this stuff in your planning and development, and then you can just kind of go from there. So let me show you here's the curb. So information on a ribbon curb, curb and gutter section, how that's designed, things like that. So all that information is in here, and they have a bunch of different stuff. The plus is that means that basically if you're following this, you're following their design, and so you're not having to reinvent the wheel sometimes as far as just basic designs of what they expect to see on the road. All right, and then you can go into things like, this is actually the City of Bryan page right here, and it has all the information. And if you go into it, like in this case I went into their mapping services, I can actually come in and look at the planning and zoning for specific areas. So if I zoom in here, you can look that this is all residential 5,000 district RD5 property. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you go into the municipal code, you can find that information out. Now sometimes they'll also have this as like a PDF and things like that, so you can get that information there as well. So those are some of the resources you can use to find out specifics about a certain area that you're looking at, like what's expected as far as road work, what's expected as far as things like that, and then you can access those in your design. So one of the things that you need to understand is, in addition to how we are to design the parts of our design, there's a specific way most municipalities like to have you provide their documentation in their design. And so this is when you've actually gotten your things and you're asking that municipality, hey, you know, I want to build this thing. They're going to say, okay, you need to deliver to our engineering group certain information. And so this is all almost always tied to what's called a site plan, which is the drawing of the individual construction site. And in the site plan, you're going to see a lot of things like project location, outlines of buildings, where utilities are coming in, where driveways are coming in, adjacent roads. You'll see the right-of-way and things like that. And that's going to be normally submitted to the municipality, sometimes an outside agency, for approval. And then not only that, but sometimes you're actually going to be asked to give it in a certain software format because they use certain things. Like one of the examples of that is the Department of Transportation wants you to be using MicroStation or Bentley for road information. Now what a lot of these companies will do, and this is like Civil 3D, this is Bentley, this is Trimble, what they'll do is they'll actually have software. Their software will have the ability to save it out in that whatever that format is, because that's otherwise you're not going to be able to continue running a business if you have to do that. They also have a certain software that's whole job is to take your package that you design in one software like Civil 3D and push it into one like Bentley or Trimble, and vice versa. So that's not normally it's a consideration, but it's not really a gatekeeping thing as far as software and how you design your product. So this is what the City of College Station requires. So you have to have an application fee. Think of this as a processing fee. If you've ever bought a house, this would be kind of like the fee you have to pay to get paperwork started on getting your title written up. There's going to be 6 copies of a site plan you have to produce. You've got to produce 1 copy of a landscape plan. You have to produce building elevations for all the buildings. So that's not only the foundation, but the elevation, because there's certain height limits in certain areas. Great example would be around an airport. You can't put a big high rise by an airport. And so there has to be these elevation things. And then if you actually look in the codes, you're really not supposed to be building a house above 3 stories in the Bryan College Station area without an added permit. Your listing of materials used for the facade and screening, color samples of all the buildings, electronic copy of the site plan, obviously, and then 2 copies of your gradings, your drainage, your erosion control, because these each go to different departments in the municipality. As far as list of materials used for all facade and screening, a good example of this was years ago, they were building a building in downtown Bryan, and in it they looked for these materials and all, and they wanted to make it look really good. And so what they found was this really cool looking like stone that had these little flecks of gold in it, and they were like, oh, this will look great on our facade and by our entrances and all. Well, the little gold flakes were iron pyrite, and what does iron do when it gets wet? Well, it rusts. And so after a short time that was on the walls started to look like they were bleeding, and they tried everything to prevent this. And then, if I'm not mistaken, they just had to like stucco over the whole thing because they just couldn't figure out a way to fix it. So that's one of the examples that why they want to know what you're using for this material. A little, oh, by the way, if you look at the Capitol building in Austin, that pink granite that's being used in the Capitol building actually is radioactive. Not a high amount of radioactivity, but some amount of radioactivity that can be found in there. And so, sometimes you'll pick a material and you have to look into that as far as whether there should be a concern or not. Now, that might explain some decisions that are sometimes made in Austin, but we'll just leave that there. Also, color samples. There was a business that was in College Station, and actually, to be fair, it didn't used to be in College Station. When the business started, it actually was way outside of College Station. But this place was called the Silk Stocking, and the Silk Stocking was a gentleman's club, for lack of a better term, that as College Station expanded, it ended up being in the city limits. And of course, College Station didn't necessarily like that one of those establishments would be within the city limits, but the place was grandfathered in. There was often a lot of contention between those the owner of the establishment and College Station, and they went over and one of the things that he did one time was he painted his building this garish pink color and all this, and that was not actually allowed in the color samples for the College Station, for the city of College Station. So he had to go change that and all that. Eventually, I think he stopped paying his tax on his alcohol, and the place eventually got shut down. But that's as far as color samples go, that's one of the things that you need to consider in your design, and one of the reasons why they asked to submit it. You can't throw something in that's just completely against everything else in a specific area or a specific zone. A couple things I want to talk about, just so you understand. When you're looking at things, you'll see things like a property line, and this is the legal boundary of the parcel of land. And so if you have a property line, it's set by surveying, and when you buy that property, it's there. And then you have easements. Easements could be because there's a pipeline that goes through that area. It could be because there's a power line that goes above that area. Easements are right-of-way privilege offered by the property owner to the public. And so an easement can cut across your property, but the public has some control over. A good example is if you had like a sewer line running through the back of your property. The public, the city still has ability to access that and things like that. Also, you'll see that there is a thing called like setbacks. Setbacks are set up as a way, so you basically can't put a building right up close to the street. And so they have these setbacks that are set up, and that's the distance from the property line to any structure on the site. Now, that doesn't mean like you can't put a parking lot close to the edge. You can't put a building close to that edge, and so that's a setback. One of the things, I don't know if I have it here, right of way. You hear me hear that a lot. Right of way is an easement basically that you're going to find to like either side of a road. And so the right of way is normally wider than the actual road. The road might be a 2-lane road. It is 25 feet wide. And yet the right of way is almost twice as much. A lot of people's front yards, at least what they think their front yard is not actually theirs. They have ability to use it, but it actually is a right of way of the city. So if you look at a sidewalk, normally the sidewalk and then that little bit of grass in between before you hit the road that you still have to cut, yeah, that's actually normally part of the city's right of way, and they can access that. So if they decide to suddenly widen the road, you could lose that portion of your front lawn, but they don't have to pay for it because they have the right of way. So this is one of the things that you would see on like a site plan. And so if you were coming in with the site plan, you would have these standard details, and some of them are stuff we already do, like title block, border, things like that. And then there's things we haven't done yet, like create a vicinity map, the scale of the thing we of course have done. Sometimes there's a legend that you have to include, because you're showing certain symbols and people have to know what those symbols mean. So you create a legend. You're going to have roads and sidewalks and parkways and all that. So if you look at this, like in this case, here's everything that I'm building in my design. And so I have my parking lot, I have the driveways that kind of come in, I've got my building pad and all that. In this case, this is a retention pond right here that's being added because you've added the parking lot, so you have to deal with that drainage and all that. You see all that information. You also are showing the finished ground contours, which we haven't got to yet, but that's going to be whenever we're dealing with the surfaces and showing what the ground is there. And one of the things that it also provides is the elevations. That's what these are right here. Normally you're going to see the major and minor contours. You need to show the flow of traffic. So if they're pulling into your thing, is it a one-way direction? Is it a two-way direction? And you show the flow of traffic as far as that goes. And then if you are having a parking lot, there's actually rules depending on what the building is on your parking lot space. There might be a series of you're allowed this many spaces, or you have to have a minimum of this many spaces. So if you ever go to a place like the movie theater and there's a ton of parking spaces, well, what determined that parking space? Those are actually set up by the codes for Bryan College Station area as far as parking spaces go. You need to show all the handicapped parking spaces. That is a state and a federal rule that you have to follow and all that. And normally it's a certain minimum amount of handicapped parking spaces you have to have for whatever your parking area is. You need to have legends and notes to tell you what's going on. So if you look in here, they're talking about, hey, this is not in the floodplain. Well, they are explaining part of their design by writing it out. And so you'll see stuff like that. Over the next few weeks, what we're going to do is we're going to break down a site design and then what it takes to kind of develop a site. And so that's going to be kind of our progress as we go on. So now we've kind of moved away. I've kind of given you the basic drawing tools and all that we need so we can do some more of the civil design later on. And so you're going to see that in how our assignments are laid out and things like that. All right?